Hey everybody, it's Chris from Chris Beat Cancer, and today I'm interviewing Dr. Keith Scott-Mumby, author of Cancer Research Secrets. Now, I first discovered Dr. Mumby, I don't know when it was. It's been some years. It's probably 4 or 5 years ago. Had this book for a few years, and Dr. Mumby was on the Truth About Cancer series, so some of you will recognize him from that. And I've really been looking forward to interviewing him for a long time, and we just finally got it coordinated. And he's a brilliant man, has so much to say, probably could talk for 8 hours straight. And we're just going to get right into it. So, hey, Dr. Mumby, how are you?
I'm great, thanks, Chris, and it's nice to be with you.
So glad to connect with you, and I'm excited, man. It's one of the funnest things about what I get to do is I get to talk to brilliant people and learn exciting, interesting new things along the way and then share it. So I feel like I have the dream job. But anyway, so let's talk about cancer, right? How did you got your medical degree in 1970, is that right?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah.
And what drew you to alternative medicine? Because I'm assuming you had a very conventional training, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a Bachelor of Medicine and a Bachelor of Surgeries degrees. That's what you have to practice in the UK. And the time was when everyone thought I was going to be a brilliant surgeon. You know, I won anatomy prizes and stuff. Anyway, long story short, I jumped the fence really early on, about 1972. I went over into alternative medicine. It just made sense to me. Everything resonated. And I've been in that field ever since, really. I never went back to orthodox medicine, and I've never really prescribed any kind of drug regimens or anything in the last 40 years. Why would you? There's so many other good alternatives. I retired some years ago and came to the States, and now I've made my mission to share the information, to give out knowledge and learning rather than sit there listening to complaints of belly aches and headaches and things.
I understand. So what happened? Like, what opened your eyes? And because at some point you must have thought to yourself, this system is broken, or these solutions don't work for people. Like, how did that happen?
Well, let me tell you my biggest aha, Chris, which is in 1976. A British psychiatrist called Richard Mackiness published a book that he called Not All in the Mind, because he was tired of people being told it's all in your mind, go and see a psychiatrist. And there was actually some fixable problem, in this case, food allergy. So I read this book that said, so much stuff could be a food allergy, anything from Meniere's syndrome, the dizziness, the colitis and asthma to, eczemas and all kinds of things could be a food allergen, including, mental fog and fatigue and underperformance and all those kind of things. So instead of being like my colleagues and say, what a bunch of crap, I thought, well, I'll find out. I put a couple of patients on a diet, and wham, bam, within a week, they threw all their meds away, all their symptoms went. In a way, I was lucky. If the first two had been tough cases and not worked, I might have had a very different life path. But in fact, they were miraculously transformed. And I thought, this is it. Why bother with orthodox medicine and drugs? Because I very quickly developed a saying, Chris, which is a cure. My definition of a cure is no symptoms or no treatment and no symptoms. That's a cure. So if you're taking medication every day, by definition, it isn't doing you any good. It's just holding things at bay, but it makes no attempt to find a solution. So in a kind of, flash, like a genie out of the bottle, I suddenly switched over to this whole new paradigm where you let nature heal, and all you're really doing is taking the barriers out of the way, whether it's deficiencies or food allergies or heavy metal or whatever. So I became a great campaigner ever since then, and it's been the passion of my life to teach people this whole different way of doing medicine.
And you became very well known as a food allergy expert in your career.
Oh yeah,
correct?
Yeah, in the 90s. Yeah, right. I got at one stage christened the world's number one allergy detective because I had so many fascinating stories. A woman that was violent and took a knife to her husband turned out to be a wheat allergy. This Irish boy that tried to strangle somebody, attempted murder, turned out to be a potato allergy and stuff. There were very exciting times and very exciting cases, and I spent a lot of time up in the media and on TV explaining how this could work, So I became a champion too in the 80s. Now, at the beginning, I've got to tell you this, it's kind of jokey, but at the beginning of the 80s, in the local hospitals around, they used to call food allergies and this kind of stuff mumby jumbo. By the end of the 90s, the British National Health Service was ordering my allergy, formulas and remedies on the National Health Service. So I went from quack to being respectable in 10 years. Now in medicine, that's meteoric, right? It takes 50 years.
Yeah, usually not until you're dead.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Like James Lind and lemons for scurvy, right?
Yeah.
So what are some that, we'll get to cancer, but what did you find that some of the most common allergies that people suffered from, food allergies, what were you see? Were there some that you saw over and over again?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a kind of hit table, a league table. Wheat would be top of it for adults. Milk would be top for children. So it varies ever so slightly. But there's certain things come up over and over, wheat, corn, dairy, eggs, coffee. The way I teach this typically is that these are what we call farmer foods. And historically we were hunter-gatherers, as you know, and we ate paleo foods. And then about 10,000 years ago, we settled down and became farmers. So we started growing crops and raising chickens and doing cattle and stuff like that. All of those foods, funnily enough, are the ones that are least tolerated. 10,000 years is nothing biologically. It's a blink of an eye. We haven't had a chance to evolve. Not that I want to evolve to be able to eat burgers, but we could probably gradually adapt to these strange new foods. But right now, they're not the right ones for us, and therefore they're the common trouble. But I don't want you to run away, Chris, with the idea, or any of your listeners, I should say, to run away with the idea, it's all, casein and gluten, and that's it. I've had people allergic to anything you can name, including lettuce, tomatoes, bananas, I even had people who were allergic to certain spring waters. They could drink the Perrier, but they couldn't drink the Evian and so on. It's a person-by-person thing, and that's probably the number one learning I've been trying to share in the last few years is everybody's different, everybody's unique and individual, and yet orthodox medicine is completely stuck on the average person. Now, there isn't an average, not one single average person walking the planet. They're just averages, which is an abstraction of all kinds of values. So, in other words, they're treating a non-existent person always. Therefore, they don't get good results. It's very crucial.
That makes a lot of sense. And what do you think the best diagnostic methods are for food allergies?
Okay, well, I used to use a great method. I mean, I do emphasize I've retired now, so I don't want calls from people saying, hey, I got X. Not because I don't like talking with people, but I can't help you folks. But I used to practice a method that was called Miller's method. It was developed by a guy called Carlson Lee in Missouri. And he was giving allergy shots. This is back in the 30s, right? 30s or 40s. He was giving shots of stuff and found not too surprisingly that, some of the shots made the person ill. You give somebody house dust, starts wheezing. So that's no brain, buster at that point. But he was fooling around with different dilutions, and the real brain buster was that he found that at certain dilutions, the whole thing would switch off. So this became ultimately known as the Provocation Neutralization method. We actually give shots in the arm. This is not scratch or prick tests, actual shots. And if the wheal grows significantly, that's a good pointer. But the killer is the symptom. I give a guy a shot of tomatoes and his asthma comes on. I can say to him categorically, tomatoes cause your asthma wheezing symptoms. Don't eat them, or if you must. We gave this, as I said, it's called provocation neutralizing, Chris, because we'd work out the critical dilution that turned it off. And then the person would take this as an antidote. They'd put a couple of drops under the tongue before food, and they could usually go ahead and eat the food anyway, within reason. Now, as I say, this was all called quackery back in the early 80s. But if you type in SLIT now, sublingual immunization therapy, there's about 50 million returns on Google. Everybody's doing it, but back in those days it was pioneer, but to me that was the very best testing. Now you can do blood tests, you send away a blood sample. It's called cytotoxic testing, and it sometimes gives good clues. The trouble is it has a significant proportion of false negatives. Now, a false positive is not a big deal, as I'm sure you can work out. You think you're allergic to blueberries and you're not, so you don't eat them. That's not a problem. But if you've told you're not allergic to blueberries and you are, that's a big deal. So it's gonna stumble you. And unfortunately, there are too many false negatives for me to encourage it much. Now, you might think, well, trial and error eating, obviously, just eat the stuff and see what happens. But that doesn't work either. We have this phenomenon called the masked allergy. And providing you're eating it on a regular basis, and let's face it, most people eat wheat every day. They drink coffee every day with milk in it every day. So the person is never really free of it. So that masks or disguises the allergy. And that leads to the main sort of discovery technique, which is to avoid likely culprits for a week or 10 days, see if you improve, and then reintroduce foods one at a time and see which ones are the naughties. And it's usually only one or two or three things, and it's a journey I think everyone should do at some time in their lifetime. It means you'll live a lot healthier and probably live a good lot longer too. But doing this is where I first broke into cancer. Back in the 80s, I was seeing people, they're coming to see me for all kinds of reasons, but some of them had cancer. And it all of a sudden went either into remission or totally stopped. It was progressing and just stopped dead. So from then on, and experimenting over those years, I realized that diet is probably the number one influence on what the cancer will do. You can strangle this puppy completely if you just change your diet very significantly. And of course, that's probably the world's number one learning about cancer, is it's really almost entirely diet. There are tribes and nations and societies where they never see cancer because they're eating differently from us Westerners. Anyway, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but you're asking about the best allergy testing. The only things that don't work for food are scratch and prick tests, and they do a blood test where they measure IgE.
Yeah.
But that's only one tiny allergy factor, the one that might give you anaphylactic shock and you might have to rush to ER. But that's very unusual. The other kind of allergy...
I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people are getting into food sensitivity testing, right? Which is typically the IgE test, right?
Right, yeah.
And I've had that done. Listen to this. I've had that done. And I sent it off. It came back. It had a list of foods that I was supposedly sensitive to. And I was like, wow, okay. I was surprised by it. And I eliminated those foods. Well, the practitioner that ordered that test, he actually ordered the wrong one. I wanted the one that was more comprehensive and tested for like hundreds of compounds. And he only ordered the one that tested for like 50. Yeah. So I said, hey, I wanted the comprehensive one. He said, okay, that's fine. We'll just do it again. So 2 weeks later, did the same test again, and it came back, and the results were the complete opposite.
I'm sorry,
opposite.
But yes.
So I'm like, what is this? This is worthless.
Right. I have to say that is one of the problems, but I'll try and explain it verbally, although it's much easier with a diagram. But basically, they only have a choice of 5. It's like a 0 to 5 test scale, Chris. So if you think of it as 1 to 100, it's broken into 5 divisions. So if you're only one division out, now they say we're only one division wrong in our estimations 95% of the time, and that's true. But one division wrong could mean it's really a grade 1 and is a value 1, but they've measured it as 2 and it's a value 39. So that's a hell of a difference, from 1 to 39 is enough to put the thing right off the Richter scale. So, in fact, it's not really accurate enough. Now, if you throw in things like blood doesn't last in transit that good, and throw in the factor that if the operator's having a crap day or fell out with his girlfriend the night before and isn't paying enough attention, to me, that's, it doesn't work well enough to be reliable. That's my sort of it's called cytotoxic testing.
Makes sense.
And I don't want to knock anybody's business, but there are better ways. And ultimately, the body is the best test bed. But you have to do it right. If you don't exclude the food, then it stays a masked allergy. If you're having milk every day and you think, well, I'll drink some milk and see what happens. Well, nothing's going to happen because you had some yesterday, you had some in your coffee this morning, some the day before. So no necessary reaction. And weirder still, the person might get their symptom on the day they didn't have any milk.
How long, for someone that is watching this or listening and they're thinking, well, maybe I do have a milk allergy, maybe I have a wheat allergy. What do you think a good amount of time to eliminate those foods is for them to really, sort of on their own try to figure this out?
Right. Well, I do have a book, of course, which would cover that. Do you want me to plug it,
Yeah,
Chris?
please.
It's very simple, and it's a self-help book, so it's designed exactly to answer this question. It's called Diet Wise, so it's at www.dietwisebook.com. And
Great.
it'll talk the person through that. But in broad figures, you need to eliminate the food 7 to 10 days. Now, the person needs to be strict. It's one of the important things to say. It's not a slimming diet, where you can have a teeny piece of chocolate cake and you still lose weight. It's not a big deal. On this, it would be a disaster because you're trying to completely cleanse your body of that food. And typically, people get, very hooked and addicted to things, and they get unpleasant withdrawals for the first few days. You need to get through all that. And when the withdrawals clear up, that means your body is now clear of that food. So you start reintroducing things. And again, it says in that book how to do the best kind of challenge test. Nothing's 100% reliable, but you just got to give it a shot. But the important thing is not to wait. If you say, well, I'll carry on with it, I feel great, my asthma's gone, I'm going to stay on this for 6 weeks. Because what can happen is this masked allergy can die down to the point, just by avoidance, to the point where it's not really a big deal after a few weeks. It's like a fire that's gone down to glowing embers. Now, if you throw fuel on, it'll blaze up again. So if you go back to eating the food, you'll feel crap again. But right at that moment, you need to get a move on, in other words. So not less than 5 days and not more than about 3 weeks. So the person really needs to get motoring. That's the critical time when the person's most sensitive. They've been eating it regularly, frequently, probably in huge amounts, suddenly stopped. And then when you introduce the food, you're going to get the maximum possible impact. So it's not likely that you'd miss it. So that's important.
So you're saying, maybe 3 weeks is the time to reintroduce it to confirm.
No, that's the last. After that, it starts to get unreliable. No, I'm saying 1 to 3 weeks.
Got it.
That's the critical period. Don't wait too long
to reintroduce.
Yeah.
Got it. That's great. That's super helpful. I'm excited, and thanks for promoting your book there. I know it'll be helpful to people. So let's talk about cancer.
Yeah, sure. Well, I came on this pathway with more or less what I was just talking about. Just changing people's things around. All sorts of things happened, the migraines went, the rashes disappeared, the irritable bowel, and wham, the cancer suddenly seemed to go, if not into remission, quite often, yes, remission, but even if not, it seemed to be halted. It just stopped progressing at that point. And not only that, but the person started to feel good. A cancer patient feels pretty toxic and yucky. Anyway, so to shorten the story, I just went down that pathway and did a lot of experiment with a lot of patients. And all of the things you read about are true, like chemical overload, these are carcinogens, Otto Warburg, oxygen and so on. But, diet has got to be the first port of call. It's the most important thing you're doing. And looked at from the other side, it's also the quickest. If wheat is screwing up your body, the sooner you stop eating wheat, the better the happier your body's going to be. I should probably put this out as one of my important maxims in that Cancer Research Secrets is any good health measure is an anti-cancer measure. It's kind of obvious, but nobody says it much. Anything that will help your body health in general, if you're normal, that's fine. But in a cancer fighting situation, the same thing is also a good tool. So we all know the importance of diet and nutrition. And if I'm saying anything, Chris, I'm saying nutrition is not just what you're short of. Like B vitamins and so on. It's what you're doing that you shouldn't. So, if you lived in Africa and you're starving, okay, that's things you're short of. But in the Western world, people are doing things they shouldn't. So they need to take things out of their diet. And that gives a bigger, faster, and more dynamic result than just adding in supplements.
Absolutely. The Western diet is definitely a diet of excess for the most part. And in some ways, we're still deficient, right, as you've seen. In certain nutrients, mainly from not eating enough fruits and vegetables.
We're overfed and nutritionally deficient. I think that's true to say.
Yeah, overfed, undernourished. Yes. So as you started to see, your patients getting well, remissions happening, I am assuming at some point you started investigating alternative therapies, things outside the mainstream, right?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, as my reputation grew, I mean, at one stage, Chris, people were flying from all over the world because there were less than a dozen of us doing it full time. It was very pioneer stuff in the late 70s, early 80s, and I had people coming in from Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, and so on. But gradually, as the movement, we called it the clinical ecology movement originally, which I think was a great name. But a lot of people kind of piggybacked the name who'd got no medical training. They didn't even have a first aid certificate, and they were suddenly calling themselves clinical ecologists. As the movement grew and I got more and more people, then I started to look at what the serious options were for cancer. And I know, a lot of them. For example, I began setting up lines and doing IVs of high-dose vitamin C. That was terrifically important. And since you've got a line up, and you're running good stuff in, we used to add all kinds of nutrients and also started adding homeopathic remedies, particularly the complex compound type that come from Germany called homotoxicology remedies. So it was a great opportunity to really mess with a person's internal environment and quite quickly make changes, get toxins out, which is important, and get the good stuff in. In fact, that's what the word homotoxicology really means. It means getting the toxins out of the body. And it's a very important dynamic method. And we'll probably get a minute to talk about homeopathy later. That's all good stuff, safe stuff, healthy, holistic, not at all threatening. The body doesn't get disturbed or upset. It's really a nice way to go. And then, the results were seen to be even more dynamic. High dose vitamin C is one of the best things we ever do. And if you supplement that with oxygen, you can administer oxygen in various ways, orally, rectally, vaginally, even in the ears. In fact, I used to treat patients oxygen-wise. I used to treat them until when I did the phlebotomy to put the line up, I wanted to see scarlet blood in the vein, not purple, dark venous blood, which means it's oxygen reduced. But I wanted the venous stuff to come out bright scarlet. That's a very quick test to know that your patient is well oxygenated.
And this would be like ozone therapy?
Well, you can. I used to use ordinary oxygen from a cylinder, and as I said, you can inhale it, put it in the ears, or insufflate rectally and vaginally. It works just as well. I never did ozone therapy myself, but it's perfectly valid. I'm not. Some doctors do. It's highly reactive stuff to handle, whereas an oxygen cylinder is real easy. You get your hands on it very easily. It's prescribed for asthma cases and so on.
So I've been to the UK a few times, and I have lots of friends and contacts there, and I know that the climate over there is very different than the US. Even though in the US it's still not easy to get alternative cancer treatments, it seems even more difficult in the UK. How were you able to do this?
Well, things were a lot different 20 years ago, remember, when I was particularly active there. For a long time, Europe, and including the UK, lived by something called the Helsinki Accord, and incidentally, the US signed it as well. The Helsinki Accord was a very important medical doctor. It gave every doctor the freedom of conscience to choose what he thought was the best treatment in the situation for his patients. And there were no restrictions when we started out. Well, as you know, Big Pharma's been eroding these freedoms for years now, and in the US it's pretty brutal. You can go to jail. I don't recall any doctor being jailed in the UK, but they would pull your license pretty quickly. Well, I say pull your license. When I was practicing, you didn't have licenses. You were on a register. And as long as you were a registered practitioner, you were good to go. And you could more or less do what you want. Latterly, in the last 10, 12 years, they've introduced the licensing system there too. So, it's a big threat now to alternative doctors. They try and say it's unscientific, but what do they mean by scientific? They talk about evidence-based medicine. Well, what evidence? We know for a fact now that at least 20% of published studies are either fraudulently manipulated or accidentally screwed up in favor of the drug company, let's put it that way. Some of it is clearly deliberate fraud. So, to just talk about the science-based medicine and evidence-based medicine, I think is kind of just misleading propaganda. There's plenty of evidence in the alternative field, but they won't look at that. that evidence doesn't exist. Evidence-based, we mean this evidence that we approve of. We're not interested in your evidence. And so, you know what it's like. I mean, listen, the whole world is deteriorating intellectually now. I mean, nothing made it more clear than in the polarization since the last election. Nobody's talking to anybody about anything. Everybody's making assumptions about the other side. And it's been like that in medicine for, a number of decades now. There was a lot more crossover and give and take. For example, I found from a colleague that surgeons in England used to give homeopathic arnica, which is an injury recovery homeopathic remedy. And they used to give arnica 2M, which is long past the stage of water. It's water plus a signal, but it's very, 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 very dilute at 2M. Why did the surgeons do it? The answer is it got the person out of bed next day and they were home in 2 days. So they did it, but nobody would ever admit it. They'd go to conferences and they'd all laugh and scoff at homeopathy. But these people were doing it on the quiet. Why? Because it works, But now there's that sort of crossover is tightened and tightened and tightened, and it's a very sad times that we're living in. It's almost impossible to talk to people on the other side now. They assume you're a lunatic, like, the Democrats assume a Republican is a psychopath, and a Republican assumes that Democrats are mindless idiots. It's just an assumption, Well, it's the same kind of polarization in medicine now. Politics, everything, Chris. So I'm not going to broaden it that far. But, it was possible to practice medicine according to your conscience, certainly up until the end of the 90s. It's just since then it's deteriorated.
That's really interesting, and I had no idea that the climate was different and better back then, and that it has gotten worse. I just assumed it had always been difficult over there. And what you're talking about now is something that we're trying to make happen in the U.S., right? Is to try to expand medical freedom, to give doctors more freedom to practice medicine according to their conscience. I mean, that's the absolute best possible scenario, is that a doctor can practice without fear of repercussions, losing their license, going to jail. And it's, again, whether or not those changes are actually happening, I don't know, but we're hoping they will.
Well, we all hope it will for the obvious reasons, because the only standard of medicine is not pharmacological. There are other ways of practicing, so we want to see that freedom restored. I wouldn't hold your breath, Chris. The trouble is the boarding system here is guaranteed to perpetuate status quo. If somebody steps out of line, and especially if they step out of line and start doing strings of miracle recoveries, they're going to get cut down because you make the other doctors look incompetent and stupid, which of course they are in the main. Your US doctors are not that hot, not that good. That's why you're 38th in the world table of healthy nations, right? Way behind Morocco and a few other countries like that, right?
Even Costa Rica. We're even behind Costa Rica.
It's embarrassing. That's one of the reasons they're not that good. So when somebody stands up and says, "Hey, this is really working," they don't want to know. It's cutting their income stream, so they're going to pull your license. Unless that system is changed, I don't have any hope that things will be different. It's got to be some other independent body that's making the decisions.
That couldn't be more true. I mean, I talk to cancer patients every day, and I have lost count of the number of times I've heard a patient say to me, I've changed my diet, I've changed my life, I've got rid of stress, I went for my last appointment and my tumors are shrinking, my blood work's better, I've had lesions disappear, whatever, right? And my doctor just said, "Oh, okay, well that's good, just keep doing what you're doing." And they don't care. They don't ask what I'm doing. They
don't even ask, do they? No, wouldn't you want to know? So, you've got to be cynical, Chris. You've got to be really cynical and think, do these people really want recoveries, or do they just want the money? And, I made my cynical decision decades ago. They just want the money. The idea of curing. In fact, curing is counterproductive, as we know. The cancer industry is not about cures. It's about racketeering and income.
Treatments
Oh,
make
there
the
we
money,
go.
not the cure, right?
Yeah, there we go on the politics again.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
So,
if you want to, let's talk about your patient's options. There are many, many,
yeah.
many options, of course, and that's why I put that book together. What are the options? I don't agree with everything that's out there in the holistic field. Some people seem to think, well, if the FDA attacks it, it must be because it's good and because
Right.
it works. And I don't find there's any logic in that at all. Sometimes the FDA attacks something because it's crap and it's dangerous and silly. And sometimes, of course, it's because it's good. But I've tried to sort these out into all the huge expanse of wonderful possibilities that there are out there, Chris. You've heard them all, insulin potentiated therapy and things like that, to psychotherapies and oxygen therapies, herbals, holistics, homeopathics, I should say. There's so many possibilities that I think it's important that we lay it before a person, because I think there's one important principle I stick to, though, Chris, even though I'm totally holistic, would never administer anything I considered toxic to a patient, which is it has to be the patient's choice. And I get a bit tired of in the so-called holistic field, where you think people will be gentle and kind, just scoffing and sneering at people that take the chemotherapy route. Sorry, that's the American word, isn't it? It's got to be the person's choice. And if they're terrified that they might make a mistake, people often are. Well, I'd rather do the alternative, but what if it would work for me? Maybe it would. Maybe I'd be one of the. Because let's face it, nearly as many people get well on chemo as on holistic therapies. Why? Because the treatment has nothing to do with it. They're going to get well anyway. You know that. There's a lot of cancers will recover if you don't do nothing. So as long as you don't poison the patient to death in the meantime, a lot of them will recover. But of course,
and a lot of cancers are not life-threatening to begin with, and we have this big overdiagnosis and overtreatment problem. Early stage cancers especially are way overtreated, and most of them, it's not a risk. It's not life-threatening, slow growing, may not have ever spread, and yet that person goes through all these treatments, and then they're held up as like, look at who we cured, right?
Yeah. It's like a person was taking chemo and they're now recovered. Therefore, it was because of the chemo, and there's no logic to that. There is absolutely no scientific logic behind that. And also the same with a lot of holistic cures, of course. A lot of people say, I took Letrial and my cancer went. Yeah, but, we need a few studies that show what happens if you do Letrial versus what happens if you don't do Letrial, and try and figure out whether it's actually adding anything or not. Because Letrial is highly toxic, as you know, it's cyanide, basically. And people have died of Letrial treatment because it is cyanide. But anyway, I've lost my point. It's got to be the person's choice. And if the person is being terrorized, and they often are, I leave it to the patient to decide. But if a person, this is another very important point I want to raise for your listeners. If a person chooses chemo because they're frightened, okay, I have no problem with that. We can help you withstand the rigors of chemo by bolstering the body's nutrition and immune system and making everything, much stronger so that it can withstand this battering from toxic chemicals. And as you know, there are people who have done that. They've taken chemo, they've survived it, it didn't kill them. Listen, one of my boasts, Chris, was that for about 10 years, none of my patients even lost their hair. We were able to completely block the effect of doxorubicin and things like that on hurting the body. The orthodox doctor's argument is, well, you're also stopping it working on the cancer. No, there's absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. That's just a myth that gets established. And there was only one study that supposedly said that, which everybody quotes and overlooks or fails to remember, that 4 years later the same authors republished the same figures and said, actually, we got it wrong. Now, it's not often scientific authors in a study say we actually made a mistake. We purported to show that taking nutritional supplements is a problem and will prevent the working of all chemotherapy. In actual fact, it was only one small group. And listen, I'd have to try and... But I think it was something like this is it. Yes, it was lung cancer patients who had refused to stop smoking. That small, tiny group were a disaster and were skewing the figures for everybody else.
Was that the vitamin A study? Or vitamin E? Was it one of those?
Yes, that's right. It was E and beta carotene. Beta carotene, E, and There was one other antioxidant. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, and those were isolated antioxidants anyway, not even from whole food form.
Right. Yes. Exactly. So it's in science today. It's a question of quoting. They accuse us of cherry picking, right? If we say, well, look, this study said if you leave breast cancer alone, at least 20% of them recover with nothing. Oh, you're just cherry picking. I mean, that's a pretty significant study. I don't know if you remember it, Chris, but that came out from
Zoll. Is that Zoll?
The study was done in Norway, and it's published through the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And I love the Karolinska Institute. I trust them and I rely on them. I believe they're scientists of integrity, and the stuff that comes out of there is pretty amazing. So it should have changed everything. I don't think it changed much. I mean, it made a kind of peripheral impact, but I think everyone should have stepped back and had a hands-off attitude, and let's do the purposeful or the masterful waiting, whatever the expression is.
There's no money in waiting.
No, exactly. So
if we wait, we don't make any money. So let's just keep on treating people. I know, man. And you brought up something earlier that I've talked about before and talk about often, is that the fact that this new sort of science-based medicine, evidence-based medicine, right, movement completely ignores any evidence that does not lead to a patentable drug, right? So that's the thing. They're not looking at all evidence. They're not looking at nutritional science at all, right? And we've got reams, right? Thousands and thousands of studies on nutritional science and the anti-cancer effects of so many compounds in fruits and vegetables. And yet, there's no interest in those. That's quackery. That's not evidence-based. Only the drug studies are evidence-based.
Right. And they're the proper treatment. You like that expression? I hate that. The proper treatment is let nature do it. Let nature fix it so the person can recover totally, and the solution or the reason for their problem is gone. Like I was saying right back at the beginning, if you're just treating something endlessly, by definition, you're not curing it. You're not solving it. The actual definition of a cure is no symptoms anymore, no treatment needed. But that's not a medical standard. They hate that idea.
So what are the three most important concepts that your three pillars?
My three pillars of healing. And again, let me re-emphasize that any good health measure is an anti-cancer measure. First and foremost, without any question, is diet. If you don't straighten your diet out and do something better than you're doing, and at least turn to whole foods and holistic type of diet, you don't have a chance. If you're very clever, you'll do it somewhat along the lines that I explained in Diet Wise, which is test against your body and let your body tell you which foods are, don't like that one. That's the masterful way to do it. And the evidence for diet and nutrition effects are abundant, I mean, William Stephenson, who was a Harvard professor, went and lived with Eskimos for about 30-odd years. Every season he would go up there and stay with them. Never saw a case of cancer. Not very few, not a handful, not any. Eating their natural diet, they just never, ever had cancer. And Albert Schweitzer found the same thing in the Gabon in Africa. So that's the real biggie. Number two is an emotional cleansing. It's all right fixing up your diet and taking away the crap and the toxic stuff. But what about what's in your head? Galen, who was a 2,000-year-old Roman physician, famously said, cancer never strikes a happy person. Well, he didn't actually quite say that. He said cancer is a function of black bile. Black bile is melancholia or depression, in other words, right? Melancholia means black bile. Don't know if you know that. So he's saying... Not. They're saying the person is, got to be a bit screwed up, otherwise it's not going to strike. This is what he's saying, roughly. And today, we're 1,000, if not 1,000,000 times more stressed than in ancient Rome. And then the third one, of course, the obvious one, is you've got to do a chemical cleanup and a detox. We are loaded. This is Sam Epstein's specialty. Don't know if you've had Sam on talking.
No, I need to.
He's an amazing man. Politics of Cancer is his book, which you'd love to share with your people. But basically, he talks about just the scale. He calls it white-collar crime, actually, and says they should be jailed, for lying and faking results, the FDA, all these things. He just labels it all white-collar crime, which I think is marvelously true. Where we're just loading ourselves with stuff we just do not know the what of. There's no safety studies being done on them anyway, or they're faked, like that stupid Monsanto thing that did 3 weeks to prove that Roundup is safe. What? Right. Can you imagine telling people, we'll smoke a cigarette for 3 weeks and we'll see if there's any effect at the end of it? No effects. So smoking is perfectly safe. Talk about cherry picking your science, So you have to do a chemical cleanup. Now, some of that's under our own control, of course. Out there is a very chemicalized environment, which is very difficult to shield yourself from. But then we spend most of our time at home. Or if we're at the office, we can try and do local environmental control, as we call it. You can put air filters in, you can get rid of most of the cosmetics and solvents and degreasers and all those things that you find in a typical home. I used to send patients off on what I call a nose survey. It was an old Scott-Mumby saying that anything you can smell, if there's enough to smell, there's enough to make you ill. So I go around the house sniffing things and throw it all in a plastic bag, seal it, and put it at the back of the garage and see what happens. And after 3 weeks, they're generally a lot better. I say, okay, well, just throw that plastic bag out and don't go there again.
That's
and
good
of course,
advice.
then there are physically detoxing things. We haven't time to do them all, but far infrared sauna is a great way of getting things out of your body without roasting yourself dangerously, like in a Swedish sauna. But you sweat a lot, and you do need to wash that stuff off, because you wouldn't believe the chemicals that are in that sweat when you've been in a sauna. So I think those 3 things are the first 3 major 3. Next, if I was forced to pick number 4, I'd pick oxygen, of course. That's terribly important that we're well enough oxygenated.
And your preferred method of oxygen would be maybe hyperbaric, or what would you say?
No, I think that's far too expensive, far too clumsy and clunky. But let me just make a point. Those 3 are things you can do for yourself, right? When you move to oxygen, I would typically only do that. In other words, I don't recommend that everybody goes around sniffing oxygen all the time as a prophylactic. That's something you would do more as a therapy. But it's easy to administer atmospheric pressure oxygen just through tubes and masks. I mean, the mask is the obvious one, but it's a bit intrusive, whereas if you put the earpieces in, it just feeds oxygen in through your ears at a sort of drip rate. Some people who are concerned, or they've got a cancer, so they are concerned, would do it rectally or vaginally, because that's nice moist mucous membrane and the oxygen gets absorbed very easily. That's easy to do. Whereas hyperbaric, it's high pressure. You have to be careful because you couldn't just suddenly drop the pressure, for example, or if the bag burst. I mean, none of these things happen. But you know what I mean. It's unnatural. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say. It's like forcing the oxygen in that way.
Yeah, and you're right. Hyperbaric, it can be expensive, and also can. It's not something I actively promote for people, because, again, it's not accessible for a lot of people as well. And if you bought your own chamber, it's thousands of dollars. So,
yeah. Whereas an oxygen cylinder is less than $50, and you just need some administrator tubing. So I would highly recommend that. But then, there's so many other cool things been coming forward. That's what the book is, like Avamar. That came completely out of left field. That's a wheat derivative preparation. And yet it seems to eat and munch its way through cancers. I was astonished because, to me, after 30 years as the food allergy detective, wheat is the number one public enemy, But it is a wheat derivative, and it does seem to be, highly effective. But one of the things I do want to make sure your viewers, I don't need to call them viewers or listeners, subscribers, let's call them that, is homeopathy in its place, because homeopathy gets some bad rap, and I'm very sad to see that a lot of holistic practitioners do not know its history and its power and capabilities. And they just assume that all the propaganda, well, it's just water, isn't it? They just assume all this propaganda is true. So they don't even look there. They don't even go there. How, this is scientific, right? It can't work and therefore it doesn't. That's one of science's common sayings, right? Or it can't be true, therefore it isn't. Well, it's not scientific to say homeopathy can't be true. It's got a 200-year history and masses of studies and papers that show it is effective. Again, it's cherry picking. A marvelous 1994 study got admitted in a later, they grouped a whole bunch of things together later after that, carefully omitted it because it would have skewed the figures in favor of homeopathy, and pronounced the fact that they'd looked at all these studies and it came out that homeopathy doesn't work. Well, one thing is you can't prove anything doesn't work. You can only fail to prove it does work. But, if you go about it the right way, it's easy to prove it doesn't work by omitting the proof. So there is good science behind homeopathy, and holistic practitioners should be made aware of it and they should practice it. And there are some startling things, Chris. For example, brain tumor, glioblastoma multiforme is one of the most dismal tumors you can get. The survival rate is pathetic. Usually it means operation and the person is turned into a sort of cabbage in their final months. I say months because it's not very often anyone lasts a year or 2 years after it. And yet with simple homeopathic remedies, they've had like 7 out of 11 people a full and complete recovery, to the point where they what's it called, the Anderson, what's the cancer center,
MD Anderson?
Yeah, MD Anderson, isn't it? Yeah, MD Anderson Cancer Center somewhere in Texas. I can't remember where. Yeah. But they brought it into their program because it works. And there's other jerks, with the government and so on, saying, oh, it doesn't work. I don't know if you noticed, but interestingly, the FDA called upon homeopathy to sort of prove itself, as it were, a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago. And everyone was very gloomy, they were going to trash it. But to their credit, they didn't. They just absorbed all, they were screaming, hysterical people, you dirty, filthy beasts, how dare you, got all agitated and upset. But in fact, the FDA did nothing. They just absorbed all the evidence and just sat pat. Because I don't think they could ever have won an argument. It was unscientifically proven. So guess what happened? The damned FTC gets on the case. The Federal Trade Commission, which has no medical expertise of any kind whatsoever, pronounces homeopathy as a drug, which it's not. It's herbal. It's not drug-based. And they're trying to win both arguments, aren't they? They're trying to say it's water, it's rubbish. No, it's a drug. Well, it's just water. But no, it's a drug. It's whichever way you want to jump to discredit it. They will jump that way. So the FTC, bless them, has taken it all off the shelves in over-the-counter homeopathy in Whole Foods and everywhere. And to me, this is a big tragedy because a lot of people are easily able to self-medicate.
What's the best resource for learning about homeopathy?
I think I've got to say online. I don't have a publication that I could recommend, but online. Let's not forget to do Iscador before we go off, or mistletoe, I should say. But there are some good online sites, and I think if a person really wants to know, depends what you mean. But if you're learning about homeopathy, you'd have to go to a homeopathic school if you can still find one functioning.
It's still in Germany. It's still pretty prevalent, right?
Do you know what the number one cancer drug prescribed in Germany by doctors is?
Mistletoe.
It's a homeopathic drug, mistletoe, because it works. It's highly effective, and it's available. Well, it was available. Everything's been cleared off the shelves, Chris, and it's very depressing for somebody who lives here. I like to wander along and just pick up some. If I had, say, painless diarrhea, I'd go and pick some arsenicum album up from Whole Foods, 3 or 4 little pilules, and it's gone. It's very effective, but you can't buy it now, so it's a big tragedy. But anyway, if you can somehow get your hands on it, and it's one of the good reasons to go to Europe for. I wouldn't go and spend $30,000 a month over there, but I would go over there just to buy a few files of Iscador, which is homeopathic mistletoe. But look, even if you look at the CDC website, is it the CD? Yes, cancer.gov, sorry. The cancer.gov website, and type in mistletoe, you will find 5 or 6 pages returns that are quite positive and quite favorable about mistletoe. They do not say oh, it's a bunch of crap, don't go there. They're saying, well, it's prescribed here, it's recognized for that, where tests of, like tests against cell lines have produced definite beneficial effects. So they're not in any way anti it. That's cancer.gov. And that would be a good place to look up about this specific thing, mistletoe for cancer. But homeopathy in general, I think you'd have to, probably go and find a good online teaching site. Webster's gone now, hasn't he? He's got rid of Cancer Tutor. I can't remember who's doing it now. But they do have a good page on homeopathic mistletoe as well, I think. So you could go there.
I could add, there's an ongoing mistletoe trial that has been organized by my friend Evilise Page at Believe Big. So she reversed stage 4 colon cancer with mistletoe and sort of got on this mission to raise money and partnered with MDs, and they're conducting they raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to do mistletoe clinical trials.
Right. Well, I'm pleased to hear it, and I know what the outcome will be. I just got to wait until it's been published before I can say it. But that's going to be good. So that's great work if somebody's doing that, and I hope they do it right so that it can't be impugned. They've got proper controls and randomized and crossovers and so on. These are things that do lend themselves to proper blinding. Some remedies don't. Like acupuncture, you can't do a double-blind acupuncture trial. They're either sticking the needles in or they're not. Yeah.
Right. It's hard to do a trial with carrot juice.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, one other thing I wanted to say was in that book, I did take a bit of trouble to go and, actually write up things I don't think are very good. Yeah. Some of them are very obvious, like, the Miller's vitamin D hysteria is all I can describe it as. All the good science that's been, abundant science is saying we need vitamin D for the immune system. It protects against cancer. And there's this one dude come up with some crackpot theory that vitamin D is the cause of the problem and it causes cancer. You always get crackpots, Chris. But in these days of the internet, they can create an overpowering flood of information that starts to influence people. And I'm very sorry to hear it. That those kind of things do happen. I wouldn't take Protocell for any money, and it's the fact that it got attacked by the FDA does not mean it's valuable. Listen, I know people that just took it and died within weeks. You never get to hear those stories. All you get to hear is the people that took it and got well. And like I said, that doesn't mean causation. They were on the program and survived anyway. It's the same argument we'd want to use against chemotherapy, isn't it? Well, they took the chemo, but they got well. But was it the chemo? Probably wasn't. They were probably one of the lucky survivors that were going to get well, even despite having their immune system blasted.
Well, I'm asked about Protocell regularly, and I still don't know anyone who's actually gotten well with Protocell. So, I'm just like, I don't know anybody that's used it successfully.
You might get somebody who replies, as a result of this.
Maybe somebody will, yeah. But
I tell you what would be more interesting collecting, though, Chris, is somebody please come and say, if you had a friend or a father who took the damn stuff and died, please tell us, because this is valuable information to circulate too. I just don't see how vitamin C can be a powerful anti-cancer agent, and yet they ban vitamin C completely and say it's bad for you. How can it be bad for you? And then take this croconic acid, which doesn't exist, but is definitely a mixture of sulfuric acid, hydrochloric acid, and a couple of other weird ingredients. I don't care that Jim, whatever his name was, says God gave him the recipe in the middle of the night. I think he was hallucinating. I don't think it was God for a minute. But he claims it's the word of God, So, of course, that gets, half the Southern Baptists on the go, because if it's the word of God, it must be true. But, scientifically, it's garbage, dangerous garbage.
What do you think about sodium bicarbonate?
Well, oh yes, don't talk to me about Simon Sini. He's got his followers and again boastful and again testimonials, but you never get to hear of the people who went to see Simon Sini and died. He's been indicted for killing people with his stupid therapy. So rather than make it an ad hominem on Simon Sini himself, let me just say that taking sodium bicarb is just basically stress for the kidneys. Because the kidney has to compensate back to a pH of 7.3. If you swing it off in like a pH of 9, the kidney's going to have to work like crazy to bring it back. Now, let me say this, Chris, don't give me this alkalized crap. right? I am a fierce campaigner against this alkalize everything nonsense.
I agree.
Kills people. And my evidence, as it were, there is the science of Emanuele Revici. You know this man?
I do. I have the book about him.
Right. Well, he discovered that half the cases may benefit from alkalizing, but half you'll kill them. So to say everyone should alkalize is very stupid and very limited. You have to find out which half you're in, and Revici tells you how to figure it out. So just say everyone's got to alkalize is crazy. It's going to do harm for quite a lot of people.
I agree. And when I was first diagnosed in December 2003, and when I started learning about nutrition in early January 2004 and reading all these books, that was a pervasive theme, right? It was the alkaline diet and alkalizing. And so I was, at that time, believed that was important. And then over the years, I've realized that no, nutrition is important. You just need to focus on nutrition. Don't worry about your pH. Your body will sort that out, assuming you eliminate acid-forming foods. For most people, like processed food is an obvious one. But I'm in complete agreement with you that people need to stop worrying about their pH and just focus on getting tons of nutrition in their body.
Right, and also, partly what I was saying quite early on in our discussion, trying to find the foods that don't suit you. It doesn't matter whether they're supposedly acid-forming or supposedly, and all that's craft science as well, by the way. But, there are certain things that will not suit your body, it'll harm your immune system, get rid of them. Who cares what the pH is, right?
I don't care.
Yeah. Good.
Okay. And people ask me about DCA.
Dichloroacetate. Well, this brings up a whole issue for me, Chris, which is what I call the sort of chemotherapy mentality. And it doesn't really matter whether it's supposedly holistic or it's attacked by these are all irrelevant. There are people who desperately want to take something that's going to kill that puppy that's growing in their colon, and dichloroacetate's one of them. Yeah, it kills stuff. It's poisonous, so of course it kills stuff. Letriol is poisonous, so of course it kills stuff, and so on. There's a whole array of these type of things. I mean, maybe that's how Protocell is working. It kills stuff, and sometimes you get lucky, but that's no use to anybody. But the chemotherapy mentality is really trying to kill the tumor before it kills you. And the gap between the two is often very narrow. With vitamin C, it couldn't be wider. It's about as wide as you can get. My arms wouldn't stretch far enough.
But so it's almost impossible to die from vitamin C.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas these other things, it's very easy. It's very toxic. But the thing is, these people who want to take their magic bullet, their DCA, I am being denied the right to take DCA. Did this person actually change their diet? No. Did they go on an emotional cleanup? No. Do they still, smoke, drink, and poison themselves with toxins? Yes, of course they do. But I have the right to take DCA so that I may survive the cancer. You get what I'm saying? It's all the same dopey, silly message. Just clean yourself up. That's what you need to do. And magic bullet formulas that are supposed to wipe out the cancer without wiping you out don't really exist unless it is vitamin C or Iscador and so on.
I generally avoid promoting anything in the magic bullet realm, right?
Yeah.
Because healing cancer does require such a massive life change. I mean, my message to people is you have to change everything.
It's a career change, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Everything's got to change. Your mindset, your attitude, your diet, your habits, your emotions. You got to deal with stress. You got to remove toxins from your body and your environment. It's a complete life change. Everything has to be examined and evaluated for its value to you, right?
Yes.
And so having said that, I'd love to hear your thoughts about Hamer, about emotions, the emotional connection to cancer and stress.
Well, it's absolutely crucial. Now, Hamer is a German, and I don't want to appear to be racist when I say they have a certain attitude where they like everything absolutely precise, and every box has to be ticked and so on.
Germans are known for precision. That's
precision.
Yes.
Let's call it precision instead of anal retentive.
That's racist. I'm just
So,
kidding.
so he's trying to tick every box with his theories, but I must say he's very close. But there's a couple of things wrong, which I'll share. But what Hamer found, there's no argument, which is a very common precipitating factor for cancer is an emotional trauma, a sudden severe shock. And it's very often in the previous 3 years. Like he says it's always in the previous 3 years. And I would say 40 or 50%, that's not true. And when you say to the person, they're scratching their, well, I can't think of anything, you know. What often happens in the 3 years before the precipitation of the tumor is an earlier life trauma gets triggered, typically an abuse. So it may be an abused person who had a miserable childhood, but are fine. They're now grown up, married, they've got their own kids. And about the age of 40, something, maybe it's their own kids and watching them grow up differently, reminds the person what their life was like. So it triggers it. And they have a bit of an, you know, shall we say, an episode. And that's sufficient to trigger the cancer. So Hamer's right deep down, but he's not always right in the exactness of what he's saying. It isn't, I would say 50% of the time, if you say to a person, in the last 3 years, have you had a major psychic trauma, 50% will say yes.
Yeah, 50% is pretty right on the money, even from my own experience. Of yes, some people come to me and they're like, I got a divorce, I lost my business, my mother died, you know, or my child died, I was in a lawsuit, you know, in the last 3 years. They had these traumatic life events. But then others, you know, they've had some very traumatic life events, but they were, you know, 5-10 years before, or they had a really rough childhood and things like that too. So, yeah. But it's amazing how common that is.
It can be cumulative. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Holmes and Rahe and the so-called life event scale, but they did a sort of scoring, you know, like getting married, leaving home, or the son and daughter leave home, or you even promoted can be stressful, even getting a raise can be, you know, they tabulated it and gave you a score, and they said if your score goes over 300, it's very likely you're going to fall ill in some way or other in the coming couple of years. So we're all on the same page. Hamer is, a good chap, controversial just because of his extreme. But the principle is that emotional stresses and traumas are likely to result in precipitating a cancer, and it's also part of the cure and the resolution of the problem. You know, you've got to deal with this stress, and if you've had a traumatic episode, you're going to have to visit somebody and do something with it. And when I say that, by the way, I don't find things like EFT strong enough. You know, it kind of papers over the cracks a bit, but I don't think it's strong enough to deal with deep down trauma of the kind that I'm talking about. But you have to be able to lift it in some way. I did do a book on that, by the way, The Psychology of Cancer. I don't know if your subscribers might want to look for that. But it occurred to me that somebody should write this book, about the psychological factors. If you remember the work of the Simontons, I've forgotten his wife's name, but anyway, they're known as the Simontons. They did visualizations of resolving cancers and tumors disappearing and things. And you probably know some really cool stuff in the IT field where people have invented games where you go, killing off cancer cells and things like that. Great fun for the kids. There's quite a lot of things you can do to resolve traumas and stresses, and it's absolutely vital that you do deal with it. So that's one of the reasons it's one of my three pillars. So Hamer's a figure in that area, but he's not the last word in it, certainly.
I feel like stress is one of the most important factors that is least addressed with cancer patients. Many of them will change lots of things, but they won't forgive, right? They carry a lot of negativity, a lot of bitterness, resentments, and don't want to step back and take that hard look at their emotions and how they're thinking, how they're behaving, and the baggage they're carrying. They don't. It's too painful or whatever, but they don't want to deal with it. And I think it can be the one barrier to healing.
I think it's absolutely critical, and healing is absolutely crucial if we're to release ourselves. Most people, I think, have a kind of funny attitude about healing. Oh, that means that's letting them off. No, it's letting you off. If you heal, you're the one that recovers. The other jerk can go on being a jerk for the rest of their days. Let them. But by forgiving, you heal yourself.
Yes.
You're actually empowering yourself to say, well, actually, that guy can't really hurt me. Who cares? And that's very powerful too. So it's altogether an important thing. Can I just mention a study that I read many years ago, about 25 years ago now, but it was about cancer survivals and using the word no. And they followed cases for years, and they coached a group to say no to anything they didn't like. They didn't want it, they weren't happy, or didn't want to do it, just say no. And that group lived about 10 or 15 years longer than the other group that said, well, all right, if you really want it, I'll do it for you. Just say no, you'll live longer. So that's an important de-stressing word as well.
I tell people to say no all the time, and I had no idea there was a study about this, so I really would love to see that study. Hopefully,
I'll find you the link.
Yeah, and we can share it. By the way, anybody watching or listening, we'll have lots of links for you in the show notes to Dr. Mumby's books and a lot of the stuff we've talked about. But yeah, that is so important because so many cancer patients that I know are people pleasers, and they've said yes to everything. They're always saying yes. They're overcommitted, and they don't stick up for themselves. They're getting walked all over in life, and they have all this pent up emotion and resentment because they're always agreeing to do things for other people that they really don't even want to do, and then they resent those people and they're kicking themselves, right? For getting into this mess, for just not being able to say no. And that's a huge message for me to people. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Well, there's this so-called cancer type, isn't there, which is supposed to be a woman of this, self-effacing kind you're describing. And I think it's well known and well documented. But remember, we were talking about cherry-picking science, When you go out there and research it, you find a whole bunch of people saying, oh, that's a load of baloney. We've tested and there's no such thing as a cancer personality. It's really a question, I suppose, of what you want to believe, but the most important thing is personal experience, isn't it? And I'm a physician of, enormous personal experience, and I can just tell you it's true. I don't care what these, behind-the-desk scientists say. Oh, that's a load of, we've disproved that theory about the cancer personality. Not in my book.
I am one, I just happen to think that anecdotal evidence is very powerful and very valuable. And the scientific community is so quick to just dismiss it as worthless. And yet most major scientific discoveries started with an anecdote, did they not?
Absolutely. Yeah, look at Fleming's discovery of penicillin. It was just an anecdote. There was a whole patch of dead bacteria on a plate around the mold. Oh, that's just anecdotal. So we never got any antibiotics.
Right.
Same with anesthetics. Somebody gave somebody some ether and knocked them out, cut their leg off without them feeling anything. Oh, well, that's just an anecdote, So, as you say, everything starts as an anecdote. It's an extremely powerful tool.
Yep.
The whole of modern science, like Isaac Newton, it's a story, but it truly is an anecdote, But he saw the apple drop and thought, oh, I wonder what's drawing the apple and the earth together. Very much an anecdote, but I go for it.
Yeah, well, we can learn from the experience of others, right? That's the big message, right? And if we're waiting for a rigorous, peer-reviewed, double-blind, placebo-controlled scientific study before we believe anything, or before we even try anything, then you'll be waiting a long time.
Well, I often say that's a bit like saying I won't go in the water till I can swim. It's not going to work. That line of thinking just doesn't work. You've got to go in the water and paddle around if you're going to learn to swim.
Yeah, and there's so much distrust now. I think, generally speaking, toward the scientific community and towards even scientific studies, because so much evidence, quote unquote, is coming out showing that how much fraud is in the scientific community, especially in pharmaceutical research. And there's so many incentives for, obviously financially, for the drug company to get research published, for research scientists to publish research that or to conduct research that keeps them on the payroll. And so people have become, I think, are more and more distrustful of anything coming from the scientific community.
Yeah, well, recently they found this movement, didn't they? Founded a movement called about science, March for Science, I think it was called, wasn't it? But I think agree with you. I think people would be more inclined to march for science and believe in it if they trusted it. It's science's own fault. They're trying to blame Trump for being unscientific, or, this politicians in the UK, they're not being scientific and so on. But they only share what we share, which is a lot of it seems like baloney. Why would you trust it? So if they cleaned up their act, then I think we would all want to trust science. But as I said, don't hold your breath. There's far too much money on the table. The Big Bang Theory, I like sharing this. The Big Bang Theory is such a big deal in cosmology. And in fact, it's everything, because cosmology is where we came from. So it's the biggest thing in our lives, if you think about it. In 1988, a paper was published in Nature Journal, which is the biggest scientific journal in the world. 1988, the title of which was "The Big Bang is Dead." And they produced evidence to show, not just that there wasn't enough evidence to show it was true, there was bucket loads of evidence to show it could not possibly be true. It could not be true, and that's why they're doing all these patches like dark matter and things. But I've been cynically quoted this ever since and said, why are they going on with it? The answer is it pays your mortgage and pays for your mistress. So that's my sort of amusing take on it. That's why they're doing it. They're not interested in the science anymore. The science went out the window in 1988.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up too, because to me, when I think about the Big Bang Theory, it's very hard for me to believe that a particle could explode and create a universe of perfect order with all of these perfectly ordered laws, right?
Yeah.
And even just planet Earth with that perpetuates in perfect order. What I see coming out of chaos is destruction and disorder. I don't see order coming out of chaos. Put a bunch of firecrackers under your computer, blow it up. Is it going to make your computer better? No, it's going to destroy it, right?
Well, it violates the famous second law of thermodynamics, doesn't it? That you can start with and end up with more order. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. I'd like to quote something from The Sound of Music. Julie Andrews.
Please.
You can't get something from nothing. It's one of the songs in Sound of Music.
I love the Sound of Music.
And there's more science in that than there is in Harvard and Stanton, all these places put together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate that common sense has been thrown out the window, but that's what we're trying to do is bring people back to using their instincts and intuition, right? And their common sense, and taking a hard look at their life and being willing to change everything. And even saying, hey, you know what? I have cancer. Maybe it's my fault. Maybe I contributed to my problem. And that's one of the first things one of the first epiphanies that I had was, you know what? If what these authors are saying is true, then I have been poisoning and polluting my body with an unhealthy diet. My emotions are toxic. I'm surrounded by toxic chemicals at work and at home. And all of these things are hurting me. And even though I'm not beating myself up, I'm not going to go wallow in self-pity, that empowered me to change my whole life. Right? It was like, wow.
Yes, great.
Yeah, I got excited about that idea. And I know you've seen patients with this, there's two types of patients, right? Some of them just embrace change and they're just willing to do whatever it takes. And then others are very resistant and they don't want to change anything.
Yeah.
But I was
you won't survive if you don't change, will you?
Yeah.
You know that. That's your main teaching. If you don't change, you may not survive this.
Yeah.
So it's very important. And I have a saying, cancer is not really a death knell, but it's certainly a wake-up call. If you don't wake up, you're in big trouble. If you don't wake up, it's telling you loud and clear your health is in ruins.
Yeah. So and it's telling you that your life is a mess. I like to say the way you're living is killing you.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Right.
That's the message I feel like that cancer is bringing to people. It's like, hey, the way you're living is killing you. Now it's time to change. Right? Now's the time. And it reminds me of a quote that stuck with me that I heard a patient say it was almost painful for me to hear it, but she said, "I'm not going to let cancer change me." And I just remember thinking, wow, man.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. I mean, and she ended up dying. But, it just made it almost, made the hair stand up, my hair stand up on end, because I was just like, man, this is a person that really, really doesn't understand what's happening to them right now.
Well, if people aren't willing to listen to their body, there's no kind of dialogue going on. That's the end of the story, isn't it? Yeah.
Some people can't be helped, right? Yeah. Some people can't be helped. It's tough.
Some people cannot. And, you can't, I mean, we saw this in, what was that, Groundhog Day movie. Do you remember? They kept trying to save the old man, and somebody had to tap him on the shoulder. Say, you can't save everybody. When a person's time has come, it's come. There are certain people. But, to go, when your time's come, that's fine. But to go 30 years ahead of time because you're too damn lazy to change your diet and do things differently, that's got to be nuts, hasn't it?
It's tragic. You hate to see it. People love you. They're going to miss you when you're gone.
Anyway, what you're doing, educating people, is just marvelous. We got to get the message out, despite the censorship and the media blanketing and hostility and so on. We just got to get the message out, and I think it's great what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Well, we just keep on every day, just pushing the ball a little further down. And trying to reach more people and help open their eyes and realize that they have power to change their life, that they have options, that cancer doesn't have to be a death sentence. I mean, if I wasn't getting so many wonderful messages and testimonials every day, I might have run out of steam years ago. But the fact is, like, people are getting well and it's exciting. So I just want to keep going.
Well, perhaps we ought just, to finish, ought to mention those people who you've met hundreds of who say, I really blessed the fact that I got cancer. It made me change things, and my life has come on stream in a most beautiful way since I was forced into a change of direction. So it's a kind of healing in its way. I've said and I've written that cancer does have a healing message for us, which is, do it differently.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Dr. Mumby, thank you so much. I am going to post links to Cancer Research Secrets, folks. Fantastic book. I'll plug that for you, and your other book, Diet Wise, and the other book you mentioned, The Psychology of Cancer.
Psychology of Cancer. It's called that, yeah.
We'll link to that in the show notes on Chris Beat Cancer. And also, where can people find you online?
Well, I have a very large and free, comprehensive authority site, shall we call it, alternative-doctor.com. You need the dash. Years ago, I grabbed the one I've got, and I omitted to also register doctor without the dash. That was back in the early 2000s. Oh God, it's $40,000 to buy that domain now.
Regrets.
Some smart Alex got it. I laugh at myself. I don't feel bitter about it. Anyway, you need the dash. So it's alternative-doctor.com. And there's thousands of pages of free stuff and everything you can think of, from, vaccination, psychology, spiritual, soul retrieval, food allergy. It's all there.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Thank you again, Dr. Mumby. You're a legend. Thanks for taking the time to talk.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It was really fun. See you soon.
All right. Take care. Bye now.
Bye.